Hey guys, I'm Sage, and I'm the one behind this account. If you clicked on this video, you're a very cool person, and we're connected now. Thank you so much. Now, while I don't own any of these characters, I do write all these fan fictions myself, so if you want to support an author who's trying to bring his favorite characters to life again, and if you like my story, you can always buy me a coffee with the link in my description. It motivates me to work faster and give you guys all you want. Enjoy your story. And don't forget to hit the like and subscribe button.
The air around the hull of the Chimeran flagship didn't just vibrate, it screamed. Ben Tennyson, currently standing in the sleek black and gold form of feedback, planted his feet firmly against the metal plating. Electricity crackled along his plug-tipped antennae, the smell of ozone thick enough to taste. Across from him, Vilgax loomed like a nightmare carved from green stone and spite. The warlord's respirator hissed, a rhythmic, mechanical growl that punctuated the chaos of the collapsing null, void portals swirling behind them. "You can't contain this much power, Tennyson," Vilgax roared, his voice booming over the roar of the vortex. The portal was a jagged wound in reality, bleeding purple light and distorted shadows. It was supposed to be a one-way trip for Vilgax, but the device had been damaged during their struggle. Now it was pulling everything in, like a drain at the bottom of the universe. "Watch me," Ben replied, his voice buzzing with static. He leaped forward, swinging the long plugs of his tail like whips. They lashed onto the flagship's exposed energy core, and the surge was immediate. It felt like a supernova was being poured into his veins. His eye glowed a brilliant, blinding white as he turned that stolen power toward the warlord. A beam of pure, concentrated energy erupted from Feedback's chest. It hit Vilgax's shield with the force of a freight train, pushing the massive conqueror back toward the event horizon of the portal. But Vilgax didn't go alone. He reached out, his gauntlet-clad hand snapping around Ben's ankle. The world didn't just end, it folded. The screaming of the portal was replaced by a deafening, absolute silence. Then came the heat. Ben felt himself being shredded and reassembled 1,000 times in a heartbeat. The colors of the universe bled into a muddy gray, and then, with the suddenness of a gunshot, the sky turned blue. He wasn't in the vacuum of space anymore. He was falling, and he was falling fast. Ben's transformation flickered. The Omnitrix on his chest chimed a warning, the green light flashing a frantic red before the form of feedback dissolved into light. He was just a boy in a green jacket again, tumbling through the stratosphere at terminal velocity. Below him, a sprawling metropolis stretched out, a maze of glass, steel, and concrete. He slammed into the side of a skyscraper. The glass shattered like ice, and the structural steel groaned as he tumbled through several floors of an empty office suite before finally coming to a stop against a concrete support pillar. Ben groaned, his vision swimming with spots of light. Every bone in his body felt like it had been rattled in a jar. He rolled onto his back, staring up at the gaping hole he had made in the side of the building. The wind whistled through the jagged glass. "That really, really hurt," he muttered, clutching his ribs. He forced himself to sit up, his hand automatically going to the watch on his wrist. It was glowing red, emitting a low, frustrated hum, recharging, just what he needed. Outside, a shadow crossed the opening. Ben froze. It wasn't Vilgax. A figure hovered in the air just beyond the shattered wall. He wore a skin-tight suit of yellow, blue, and black, with a large letter I emblazoned on his chest. A mask covered the upper half of his face, but his expression was clear, a mix of shock and intense wariness. The flyer descended slowly, his boots hovering an inch off the dusty carpet. He looked at the trail of destruction Ben had left through the office, then back at the teenager in the tattered jacket. "I don't know who you are, or what kind of weapon you just used to level this floor," the flyer said, his voice steady but filled with a hidden weight. "But you picked the wrong city to crash land in." Ben wiped a smear of blood from his lip and squinted at the stranger. "Who are you?" The flyer didn't blink. "I'm Invincible, and I think you have some explaining to do." Before Ben could answer, the floor beneath them began to shake. It wasn't an earthquake. It was a rhythmic, heavy thudding coming from the street level 40 stories below. A roar followed, one that Ben recognized all too well. Vilgax. Invincible glanced toward the window, then back at Ben, his eyes narrowing. Is that friend of yours? Ben scrambled to his feet, ignoring the pain. Not even close. Invincible didn't wait for a response. He blurred, a streak of yellow and blue vanishing through the hole in the side of the building. Ben ran to the edge, clutching a jagged piece of rebar for balance as he peered down. Far below, the street looked like a war zone. Vilgax stood in the center of an intersection, his massive frame dwarfing the abandoned cars scattered around him. His armor was scorched from the portal crossing, but he looked as lethal as ever. He had already grabbed a city bus by the bumper, swinging it like a club into a nearby storefront just to clear his line of sight. Get away from the vehicle, Invincible shouted, his voice echoing off the surrounding towers. He descended like a meteor, slamming into the pavement directly in front of the warlord. The impact cracked the asphalt, sending a shockwave that rattled windows for 3 blocks. Vilgax dropped the wreckage of the bus, his red eyes fixated on the newcomer. You possess the flight and strength of a high-tier biological, he rumbled, his voice heavy with mechanical distortion. But you are small, untested. Invincible didn't waste time with banter. He launched himself forward, leading with a shoulder tackle that would have leveled a house. He hit Vilgax square in the chest, but the warlord barely budged. Instead, Vilgax's hand shot out, catching Mark by the throat with terrifying speed. The sound of the grip tightening was audible even to Ben 40 stories up. Mark's eyes went wide as he felt the crushing pressure. He kicked out, his boots thudding against Vilgax's armored torso, but it was like hitting a mountain. Up in the ruins of the office, Ben slammed his fist against the Omnitrix. Come on, you stupid watch. Not now. The dial remained stubbornly red, the cooling down cycle ticking away with agonizing slowness. He looked around the office, desperate for anything he could use. He was just a teenager in a world of giants, and his new ally was currently being strangled by a galactic tyrant. Down on the street, Vilgax hoisted Mark into the air. You are not from the world I seek, the warlord said, his grip tightening. Tell me where the shapeshifter is, and I may grant you a swift end. Mark managed to grab Vilgax's wrist, his muscles bulging as he tried to pry the fingers loose. You're in the wrong city, he wheezed. With a grunt of effort, Mark swung his legs up and planted both feet against Vilgax's face, pushing off with everything he had. The force was enough to break the hold, and Mark flipped backward, skidding across the pavement. He took a gasping breath, rubbing his neck. This guy was stronger than any of the reanimen or street-level villains he usually dealt with. He was closer to a Viltrumite, but his energy was different. Darker. Vilgax didn't give him a second to recover. He reached for the hilt of the massive sword strapped to his back. The blade hummed as it caught the sunlight, glowing with a malevolent orange heat. Stay down, child, Vilgax commanded. I have no patience for distractions. Ben watched from the ledge, his heart hammering against his ribs. He saw the way Vilgax moved. The warlord was already adapting to Mark's speed. If he didn't do something, Invincible was going to get cut in half. He looked at the red dial again. It pulsed once, then twice. The red light faded, replaced by a soft, steady green glow. The signature recharge beep was the most beautiful sound Ben had heard all day. Hero time, Ben whispered. He didn't just press the watch, he slammed it. A flash of emerald light filled the office, spilling out of the broken windows and illuminating the street below. Mark looked up, squinting against the glare. Vilgax froze, his eyes narrowing as he recognized the energy signature. A massive, four-armed shadow dropped from the skyscraper. Ben didn't just fall, he aimed. He plummeted through the air, his 4 muscular arms tucked in tight, before expanding them outward like a living anchor. Move, Ben yelled, his voice now deep and gravelly. Mark flew back just as 4 arms slammed into the top of Vilgax's head. The impact sent a crater deep into the street, burying both of them in a cloud of dust and debris. When the smoke cleared, Ben was standing over the warlord, all 4 of his red-skinned fists clenched and ready. You want a piece of me, Vilgax? Ben growled, cracking his necks. You got it. but you're going to have to go through both of us." Vilgax erupted from the crater like a volcano. He didn't use his hands to push himself up. He used raw, explosive strength, throwing Ben off his back. Forearms flipped through the air, his 4 heavy feet skidding across the asphalt as he stabilized himself. Mark hovered a few feet off the ground, his eyes darting between the red-skinned giant and the green warlord. "You're the kid from the office?" he asked, his voice full of disbelief. Forearms cracked his upper and lower knuckles simultaneously. "In the flesh, or the scales, whatever works." Vilgax stood tall, brushing dust from his shoulder plates, as if the literal ton of force Ben had just dropped on him was a mere inconvenience. "You have grown arrogant, Tennyson. You think a few extra limbs will save you in this realm." He didn't wait for an answer. Vilgax lunged, his speed defying his massive bulk. He swung his energized greatsword in a wide, horizontal arc. Ben ducked, the heat of the blade singeing the hairs on the back of his neck, while Mark surged upward to avoid being decapitated. Mark didn't hesitate. He dove back down, hitting Vilgax with a double-fisted strike to the upper back. At the same moment, Ben moved in close, delivering a rapid-fire sequence of punches to Vilgax's midsection. It was a rhythmic, brutal percussion. Left, right, lower left, lower right, each blow sounding like a sledgehammer hitting a concrete wall. The warlord grunted, his armor denting under the combined assault. He dropped his sword, instead grabbing Ben's 2 upper wrists and Mark's ankle in a single, fluid motion. With a roar of exertion, he slammed the 2 of them together. The collision rang out like a bell. Ben felt the air leave his lungs as he smashed into Mark's indestructible chest. Before they could recover, Vilgax tossed them both aside. Mark was sent tumbling through a row of parked cars, while Ben crashed through the brick wall of a nearby pharmacy. Ben shook his head, pushing a display of vitamins off his chest. The red light on his wrist began to flicker. The transformation was draining faster than usual, likely due to the strain of the interdimensional jump. He needed to finish this, or at least change the tide, before he was stuck as a human in the middle of a street fight with a god. He scrambled out of the pharmacy just in time to see Mark flying back into the fray. The young hero was learning. Instead of a direct head-on collision, Mark was using his flight to loop around Vilgax, striking at high speeds from multiple angles. It was a blur of yellow and blue, but Vilgax was timing it. He was tracking Mark's movements with his red eyes, waiting for the perfect moment to snatch him out of the air. Ben saw the opening. He didn't go for Vilgax, he went for the sword. He lunged for the hilt of the massive blade lying on the ground. As his 4 hands gripped the metal, he realized just how heavy it was. It wasn't just steel, it was alien tech, dense and humming with power. He hoisted it up, feeling the heat radiating from the edge. "Hey, Squidface," Ben yelled, "you dropped something." Vilgax turned, his eyes widening as he saw Ben swinging his own weapon at him. The warlord moved to block, but without his sword, he had to rely on his gauntlets. The blade slammed into Vilgax's forearms with a shower of orange sparks. The force of the blow pushed Vilgax back into the side of a bus. Mark saw the opportunity and flew in from above, driving his knee into Vilgax's jaw. The warlord's head snapped back, his respirator hissing violently as he staggered. For a moment, it looked like they had him. But then, the sky above them began to darken. It wasn't a cloud, and it wasn't the sun setting. A shadow, vast and triangular, blotted out the light. It was a ship, but it wasn't one Ben recognized. It was sleek, white, and looked like a predatory bird made of chrome. Mark looked up, his expression shifting from determination to genuine fear. "Oh no, not now." "Who is that?" Ben asked, still holding the massive sword. Mark didn't look down. "That's a Viltrumite scout ship. And if they're here, this just stopped being a street fight." From the belly of the ship, a beam of white light shot down, hitting the pavement a few yards away. 3 figures descended through the light, landing with a heavy, synchronized thud. They wore white and gray uniforms, their capes billowing in the wind. They didn't look like monsters. They looked like gods. One of them, a man with a thick mustache and eyes as cold as deep space, stepped forward. He looked at the destruction, then at Mark, then finally at the giant green alien and the four-armed red monster. "Identify yourselves," the man commanded, his voice carrying a terrifying authority, "or be purged in the name of the Empire." The lead warrior didn't even look at the scorched pavement or the ruined cars. His gaze remained fixed on Mark, cold and expectant. Behind him, the two other Viltrumites stood like statues, their capes not even twitching in the wind. The silence that followed his command was heavy, pressing down on the street like a physical weight. Mark hovered, his breath coming in short, jagged hitches. He knew that uniform. He knew that look. It was the same look his father had given him before everything fell apart. "Mark," he said, his voice barely a whisper, "you have to get out of here." Ben, still in his forearms form, shifted his weight, his four eyes tracking the new arrivals. "Not a chance," he said, though the sheer presence of the three men made the hair on his arms stand up. "Who are these guys?" "The local police." "They are the Viltrumite Empire," Vilgax interjected, his voice returning to its usual arrogant rumble. He stood up straight, ignoring the blood trickling from his jaw. "I have heard of your kind. World conquerors, scourges of the galaxy. You claim ownership of every rock you touch." The lead Viltrumite finally turned his head toward Vilgax. He looked at the warlord with the same expression one might use to look at a particularly interesting insect. "And you are a Chimran, a scavenger. You are trespassing on a world designated for Viltrumite integration. This planet is under our jurisdiction." "I trespass where I please," Vilgax retorted. He stepped toward his fallen sword, but a blur of white and gray cut him off. One of the scouts had moved. He hadn't flown. He had simply ceased to be in one spot and appeared in another. He stood with his boot firmly planted on the blade of Vilgax's sword. The metal, which Ben had found nearly impossible to lift, groaned and snapped under the pressure of the scout's foot. The lead warrior stepped forward. "I am Lucan," he stated. "This world is currently in a state of transition. We are here to assess the progress of the local agent." He turned his eyes back to Mark. "Mark Grayson. Your father failed to prepare this world for our arrival. He has deserted his post. That leaves the responsibility to you." Mark shook his head, his hands clenching into fists. "I'm not doing anything for you, and I'm not letting you touch this city." Lucan's expression didn't change, but there was a flicker of something in his eyes, disappointment, or perhaps just boredom. "Resistance is a common symptom of planetary puberty," he said. "We find it is best to prune the weeds before they can choke the garden." He gestured vaguely toward Ben and Vilgax. "Kill the creatures. Bring the boy to the ship. We will discuss his future in the stars." The two scouts behind Lucan vanished. Ben's instincts, honed by years of combat with every monster in the galaxy, screamed at him to move. He threw his upper arms up in a crossblock just as a fist slammed into them. The impact felt like being hit by a falling moon. Ben was launched backward, his heavy body tearing through a brick wall, across a parking lot, and into the side of a concrete parking garage. The concrete buckled. Ben coughed, the red skin of his arms bruised and purpling instantly. "That was way faster than the squid," he groaned, shaking his head. Across the street, Vilgax fared little better. The second scout had grabbed him by the throat and slammed him into the asphalt, then began a systematic, high-speed pummeling that sounded like a jackhammer hitting a slab of granite. Mark screamed and dived toward the scout attacking Vilgax, but Lucan was there in an instant, catching Mark's punch in the palm of his hand without moving an inch. "You have your father's spirit," Lucan said, almost kindly, "but you lack his conviction." Ben struggled to his feet in the wreckage of the parking garage. He could see Mark being toyed with and Vilgax being beaten into the earth. Forearms was strong, but these guys were playing a different game. They weren't just strong, they were absolute. He looked at the Omnitrix. The green glow was steady, but he knew he needed more than raw power. He needed something that could handle the speed, something that could hit back with the same level of violence. "Fine," Ben spat, sliding his fingers over the dial. "You want to see a weed? Let's see how you handle a forest." He slammed the dial down. The green light erupted again, but this time it didn't just flash, it expanded. vines and emerald energy lashing out from the center of the transformation. The muscular red form of forearms began to stretch and shift, his skin turning into a dark, fibrous wood, and his head elongating into a crown of burning, swampy foliage. The scout who had punched Ben was already flying back for a second strike, his fist cocked back to end the fight. He hit the cloud of green light at full speed. He didn't hit a body. He hit a wall of dense, regenerating vines that wrapped around his arm like a living vice. From the center of the light, a new voice emerged, deeper, more organic and dripping with heat. "My turn," Swampfire growled. He didn't just punch the scout. He blasted a jet of methane-fueled fire directly into the man's face at point-blank range. The flames roared, a brilliant orange and green column that obscured the scout's entire upper body. For a second, the Viltrumite was a silhouette of ash and fire. But as the methane burned off, the man emerged from the heat. His hair was singed and his cape was a charred rag, but his face was set in a mask of pure, murderous rage. "That was a mistake," the scout hissed, his voice trembling with the effort to maintain his composure. He lunged again, his hands reaching out to tear Swampfire's head from his shoulders. But Ben wasn't a solid mass of muscle anymore. As the scout's fingers sank into the dark, fibrous wood of Swampfire's neck, the plant matter simply parted. It didn't break. It flowed around the scout's hands like thick, swampy mud. Ben didn't flinch. He kicked the scout in the chest, pushing himself away while simultaneously launching a barrage of explosive seeds from his palms. The seeds hit the scout's chest and detonated in a series of sharp, concussive pops. They didn't do much damage to the warrior's invulnerable skin, but the smoke and the suddenness of the attack kept him off balance. A few yards away, Mark was still struggling against Lucan. The lead Viltrumite was moving with a terrifying grace, parrying Mark's frantic strikes with single-handed blocks. He wasn't even breathing hard. "Your friend is resourceful," Lucan said, glancing over at the burning plant creature. "I have never seen a shapeshifter with such high-speed regenerative properties. He will make an excellent specimen for the Empire's laboratories." Mark gritted his teeth, his knuckles aching from hitting Lucan's forearms. "He's not a specimen. He's a person." Mark threw a desperate, wide hook. Lucan caught it, but this time he didn't just hold it. He twisted. Mark cried out as he was spun around and slammed face-first into the side of a delivery truck. The metal buckled, the frame of the vehicle warping around Mark's body. The second scout, who had been busy pummeling Vilgex, finally grew bored. He left the warlord lying in a heap of shattered asphalt and flew toward Ben. Now it was 2-on-1. Ben stood his ground, his feet sinking roots into the pavement to anchor himself. He could feel the moisture in the air, the life in the small patches of weeds pushing through the city cracks. He reached out with his mind, commanding the greenery to grow. Massive, thorn-covered vines erupted from the sewers and the sidewalk, lashing out at the two scouts. They were thick as tree trunks and moved with the speed of striking cobras. The Viltrumites tore through them with ease, but for every vine they snapped, 3 more grew in its place. "It's like fighting a forest." One of the scouts yelled, his voice muffled by a thick layer of moss that had suddenly bloomed over his mouth and nose. Ben was pushing his limits. The strain of controlling so much biomass was starting to make the green light on his chest flicker. He needed a distraction, something to break the Viltrumite's focus long enough for him and Mark to regroup. That distraction arrived in the form of a high-pitched, electronic whine. From the rooftops around the intersection, dozens of soldiers in high-tech black armor appeared. They weren't Viltrumites, and they weren't Vilgax's drones. They held massive, railgun-like rifles pointed directly at the center of the street. "Cease fire," a voice crackled over a loudspeaker. "This is the Global Defense Agency. You are in violation of multiple planetary defense protocols. Drop your weapons and identify yourselves." Lucan stopped. He looked up at the soldiers, then at the sleek, black stealth jets that were decloaking in the sky above. A small smile played across his lips. "More toys," he whispered. A blue portal shimmered into existence on the sidewalk, and a man stepped through. He wore a rumpled gray suit and had a face that looked like it had been carved out of a very tired piece of granite. He took a long look at the four-armed plant monster, the green warlord in the crater, and the three men in capes. "Mark," the man said, his voice gravelly and unimpressed. "You want to tell me why my satellite just told me the world was ending in Baltimore?" Mark pulled himself out of the truck, spitting blood. "Cecil, you're late." Cecil Stedman looked at Ben, his eyes narrowing. "And who's the salad?" Ben retracted his vines, his form glowing green as he prepared to switch tactics. "The name's Ben. And if you've got something that can hit harder than a freight train, now's the time to use it." Cecil didn't look at the soldiers or the jets. His eyes were locked on Lucan. He took a slow pull from a small device in his hand, a remote detonator or a communicator. It was hard to tell. "You're a long way from home, Lucan," Cecil said, "and you're making a mess of my favorite suit." Lucan tilted his head, a look of genuine curiosity crossing his face. "You know my name, and you know what we represent. Yet you stand there with these primitive weapons as if they can change the outcome of this day. It's almost admirable." "Admirable isn't the word I'd use," Cecil countered. "Efficient is more my style." He didn't give a signal, but the air suddenly filled with a high-pitched, oscillating frequency. It was a sound that made Ben's teeth ache and his swampy vision blur. The GDA soldiers weren't firing bullets. They were using sonic emitters, specifically tuned to frequencies that the agency had been developing for years. Mark doubled over, clutching his ears. The Viltrumites reacted even worse. Lucan staggered, his hands flying to his head as his equilibrium shattered. The two scouts who had been hovering dropped like stones, slamming into the street with pained grunts. Ben felt the vibration rattling his wooden ribs, but it didn't paralyze him. Being a plant-based alien had its perks. He didn't have traditional eardrums. He saw the opening. He lunged forward, his hands transforming into large, mud-filled bludgeons. He slammed them into the nearest scout, pinning the man to the ground while the sonic waves kept him pinned. "It's working," Mark yelled, though he was still struggling to stand. "Don't celebrate yet," Cecil barked over the noise. "It's a deterrent, not a solution." He was right. Lucan was already adjusting. The Viltrumite leader let out a roar that was louder than the emitters. With a burst of sheer willpower, he pushed through the sonic wall. He moved in a blur, his hand passing through the nearest GDA emitter like it was made of paper. The machine exploded in a shower of sparks, and the frequency in that sector died instantly. One by one, Lucan and his scouts dismantled the sonic array. They moved with a clinical, terrifying speed, ignoring the soldiers' desperate fire. In less than 10 seconds, the street was silent again, save for the crackle of burning debris and the heavy breathing of the survivors. Lucan stood over a pile of ruined technology, his eyes glowing with an intense, cold heat. "That was annoying," he said quietly. "Now I'm going to kill everyone on this block who isn't a Viltrumite." The scout Ben had been pinning suddenly surged upward, his fist catching Ben in the chin and sending the swampalian spinning through the air. Ben hit a brick wall, his swampfire form finally giving out. The green light flashed violently, and in a burst of emerald energy, he was human again. Ben hit the ground hard, gasping for air. The Omnitrix was dark, red, dead. Vilgax, who had been lying dormant in his crater, chose that exact moment to move. He didn't attack the Viltrumites. He didn't attack Ben. He lunged for Cecil Stedman. The warlord's massive hand closed around Cecil's throat before the man could even blink. The GDA guards opened fire, their high-caliber rounds pinging off Vilgax's armor, but he didn't care. He held Cecil up like a trophy. "You have technology that can harm them," Vilgax growled, his eyes fixed on the Viltrumites. "Give me the frequency. Give me the weapons, or I will crush the life out of this world's defender right now." Mark hovered between the two threats, the three Viltrumite gods preparing for a massacre, and the galactic tyrant holding the only man who could coordinate a defense. Ben scrambled to his feet, his hand trembling as he reached for the watch. It was still red. He looked at Mark, then at the carnage around them. "Mark," Ben shouted, "we need to move, now." Before Mark could respond, Lucan was behind him. The Viltrumite leader didn't punch. He grabbed Mark by the cape and swung him with enough force to send him through 2 city blocks of office buildings. Lucan then turned his attention to Vilgax. "You think a hostage matters to us?" he asked. "You think this one man's life carries weight in the scales of the Empire?" Lucan flew forward, his arm cocked back. He wasn't aiming for Cecil. He was aiming to punch through Cecil to get to Vilgax. Ben watched in slow motion as the Viltrumite's fist approached. He reached out, his fingers brushing the cold metal of the Omnitrix. He didn't need it to be green. He just needed it to work. The watch emitted a sharp, jagged spark of yellow light. A glitch. The world turned white. The yellow light didn't bring a transformation. It brought a scream of feedback that pulsed outward in a jagged dome of energy. The shockwave caught Lucan mid-flight, the raw, temporal static knocking him off course just inches before his fist could connect with Cecil's chest. Ben didn't feel like himself. His skin felt like it was being pulled in 2 directions at once, his vision fracturing into 1,000 different timelines. The Omnitrix wasn't just malfunctioning. It was trying to read the DNA of everyone in the immediate vicinity and failing to categorize the Viltrumite signatures. The yellow pulse subsided, and Ben stood there, breathing hard. He wasn't human, but he wasn't an alien either. His body was translucent, flickering between his normal clothes and the jagged, crystalline structure of Diamond Head. "Whatever you did, kid, do it again," Cecil shouted, rolling away as Vilgax loosened his grip, distracted by the temporal flare. "I'm trying," Ben yelled back, his voice echoing with a strange, metallic reverb. Lucan recovered instantly, shaking his head to clear the stars. He looked at Ben with a new level of interest. That wasn't biological. That was a ripple in the fabric of the local spacetime. "You are far more dangerous than you look." The 2 other scouts converged on Ben. They moved like lightning, their capes snapping like whips. Ben swung his flickering, crystalline arm, and to his surprise, it held. As the first scout's fist struck his forearm, the impact didn't shatter him. Instead, the Omnitrix redirected the kinetic energy, venting it out of Ben's back in a burst of green sparks. He wasn't winning, but he was surviving. A roar like a jet engine announced Mark's return. He came in low and fast, a streak of yellow and blue that slammed into the back of the scout attacking Ben. The 2 of them went through a skyscraper, emerging on the other side in a cloud of glass. Mark didn't stop. He looped back, grabbing the second scout by the waist and driving him downward into the roof of a parking garage. The structure collapsed under the force, floor after floor pancaking until they hit the basement. Ben turned his attention back to Lucan, who was currently being engaged by Vilgax. It was a sight Ben never thought he'd see, the conqueror of worlds fighting on the same side as a hero, even if it was only for self-preservation. Vilgax's strength was immense, but Lucan was faster. The Viltrumite was landing 3 blows for every 1 Vilgax managed to throw. Ben's watch chirped, the yellow light finally turning a solid, angry orange. The glitch was settling into a localized override. He slammed the dial. The transformation was violent. Ben's body expanded, his skin turning into a thick, organic armor of yellow and black plating. He grew into a massive, rounded shape, his limbs tucking into his torso as he became a living wrecking ball. "Cannon bolt," Ben's voice boomed from inside the armored shell. He didn't wait for a plan. He launched himself into a high-speed spin, his armored body turning into a blur of kinetic energy. He hit the pavement and bounced, using the momentum to rocket toward Lucan. The Viltrumite leader saw him coming and braced himself, his feet digging into the asphalt. He caught the spinning Ben Tennyson with both hands, the friction between his palms and Ben's shell throwing off a shower of sparks that lit up the entire street. Lucan's boots skidded back, carving 2 deep trenches in the road. "You have mass," he grunted, his muscles bulging as he tried to stop the rotation. But mass can be redirected. Lucan began to heave, intending to throw Ben into the upper atmosphere. But Ben wasn't just a ball of meat and bone. He shifted his center of gravity mid-spin, extending his claws for a fraction of a second to catch the air. He exploded outward, reverting to his standing form and delivering a double-handed strike to Lucan's chest that sent the warrior flying backward into a fountain in the center of a nearby plaza. Mark landed next to Ben, his suit torn and blood matting his hair. "We're not putting them down," Mark panted. "They just keep getting back up." "Then we hit them with everything at once," Ben said, his heavy plates shifting as he breathed. "Cecil, you got any of those sonic things left?" Cecil's voice came over the comms, cold and focused. "One, but you only get one shot, and it's going to take out every electronic device in a 6-block radius, including your watch, Tennyson." Ben looked at the orange glow on his wrist. "If it stops them for 10 seconds, that's all we need. Mark, get ready." In the plaza, Lucan stood up from the shattered fountain. He wasn't smiling anymore. He looked at the two of them, then at the sky, where the Viltrumite scout ship was beginning to descend. "Enough of this," Lucan commanded. "Bring the ship's primary cannon to bear. If the boy will not come willingly, we will leave nothing but cinders for his father to find." The sky didn't just brighten. It turned a searing, clinical white as the Viltrumite ship's primary cannon began to cycle. The air grew heavy with static, making the hair on Ben's neck stand up even through his thick, armored plating. Above them, the clouds were being pushed back by the sheer atmospheric pressure of the weapon's buildup. Mark looked up, his face pale. "If that hits the street, there won't be a Baltimore left to save," he shouted over the rising hum of the ship. Cecil's voice crackled one last time through the comms, sounding more like a ghost than a man. "Cover your ears, or whatever you have. Now." Ben didn't hesitate. He didn't just tuck into a ball. He slammed his heavy, yellow-plated arms over his head and dug his claws into the asphalt, anchoring himself as deep as he could go. Mark dived for the nearest piece of reinforced concrete, and even the Viltrumites paused, their superior senses picking up the subharmonic frequency of the GDA's final gambit. Then the world screamed. It wasn't a sound you heard with your ears. It was a sound you felt in your marrow. The final sonic emitter didn't just pulse. It detonated in a sphere of invisible, high-frequency violence. The windows of every building within 6 blocks didn't just shatter. They turned to dust. The Viltrumite scouts were hit the hardest. Because their equilibrium was so finely tuned for flight and combat, the frequency acted like a physical hammer to their brains. Lucan fell to his knees, blood trickling from his nose, his eyes rolling back. The other 2 warriors plummeted from the air, crashing through the roofs of cars with heavy, wet thuds. Ben felt the Omnitrix on his chest vibrate so hard it felt like it was trying to burrow into his heart. The orange light flared one last time, a brilliant, desperate amber, and then it went dark. The massive, armored form of Cannonbolt dissolved, leaving Ben Tennyson lying in the middle of the street in his jeans and t-shirt, his skin tingling as if he'd been struck by lightning. High above, the Viltrumite ship's cannon sputtered. The sonic interference had played havoc with its targeting sensors and power regulators. The white light flickered, hissed, and then died out as the ship began to tilt, its stabilizers struggling to compensate for the electronic blackout. For a long minute, the only sound was the settling of dust and the distant wail of car alarms that had survived the pulse. Mark crawled out from behind a fallen slab of marble, his suit in tatters. He looked at the 3 Viltrumites, who were still down but beginning to twitch, their incredible physiology already fighting to adapt. "We have to go," Mark rasped, stumbling toward Ben. "We have to get out of here before they wake up." Ben pushed himself up, his limbs feeling like lead. "Where's Vilgax?" They both looked toward the crater where the warlord had been standing. It was empty. There was nothing left but a scorched patch of asphalt and a lingering scent of ozone and chimera musk. The portal glitch, or the sonic blast, had given him the window he needed to slip into the shadows of the city. A black GDA van screeched around the corner, its tires smoking as it slid to a halt. The back doors swung open, and Cecil Stedman stepped out, flanked by 6 soldiers with their weapons raised. He didn't look at the fallen Viltrumites or the retreating ship. He looked straight at Ben. "The ship is retreating to high orbit to lick its wounds," Cecil said, his voice flat. "But they'll be back. And when they come, they aren't going to be playing games. Cecil stepped closer, his shadow falling over Ben. You're a long way from home, kid, and you just brought the most dangerous empire in the universe down on our heads. Ben looked at his darkened watch, then up at the man in the gray suit. I didn't ask to be here. I don't care what you asked for, Cecil replied, gesturing toward the open van. You've got a piece of technology on your wrist that just stood toe-to-toe with a Viltrumite scout. That makes you the most valuable asset on this planet. Ben looked at Mark, who was hovering uncertainly. Mark gave a small, weary nod. Cecil was a lot of things, but he was the only one with the resources to hide a kid who had just fallen out of the sky. Get in the van, Tennyson, Cecil commanded. We're going to find out exactly what you are, and then we're going to figure out how to win a war. Vilgax didn't hide in the shadows of Baltimore for long. He was a conqueror, and conquerors didn't skulk. They strategized. In the sublevels of a derelict industrial warehouse, the warlord stood over a glowing console he had scavenged from a downed GDA drone. His fingers, thick and calloused, danced over the interface with a precision that belied his monstrous size. He had what he needed, the frequency of the Viltrumite flagship currently hovering in the upper atmosphere. He didn't need a ship to reach them. He needed a bridge. The air in the warehouse began to hum, a familiar low-frequency vibration that signaled the opening of a localized wormhole. Vilgax stepped into the light, his eyes fixed on the destination. When the world solidified again, he wasn't in the damp cold of Maryland. He was standing in a hall of polished white stone and cold, sterile metal. He was surrounded instantly. A dozen Viltrumite warriors, their capes a sea of red and white, descended from the high vaulted ceilings of the flagship's throne room. They didn't point weapons, they were the weapons. Their presence was a physical pressure, a silent promise of absolute violence. Identify yourself, intruder, one of them commanded. Vilgax didn't flinch. He stood tall, his respirator hissing in the thin, recycled air of the ship. I am Vilgax, conqueror of 10 worlds, and I am here to speak with the one who leads this swarm. The warriors parted as a figure descended from a dais at the far end of the hall. He didn't fly with the frantic energy of the scouts. He drifted, his movement as controlled as a planet's orbit. He was older than the others, his hair flecked with gray at the temples, and his mustache was thick and meticulously groomed. His eyes held the weight of centuries of conquest. Grand Regent Thrag. You are a long way from the shadow of your own galaxy, Chimrin, Thrag said, his voice a calm, resonant baritone that filled the hall. My scouts reported a creature of your description interfering in the pacification of the local planet. Why should I not execute you where you stand for your insolence? Because your scouts are fools, Vilgax replied, his voice grating against the silence. They see a world ripe for the taking. I see a world that holds the key to the ultimate weapon in the universe. Thrag's eyes narrowed. We are Viltrumites, we do not need keys, we are the weapon. Vilgax reached into a compartment in his gauntlet and pulled out a holographic projector. A shimmering green image appeared in the air between them, a detailed schematic of the Omnitrix. Your scouts fought a boy today, Vilgax said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial growl. A boy who carries the DNA of every sentient species in the cosmos. I have spent a lifetime hunting him. Today I saw him hold his own against your finest. Imagine, Regent, an army of Viltrumites who do not just possess your strength, but can adapt to any environment, any weakness, any enemy. Thrag looked at the schematic, the flickering green light reflecting in his cold eyes. A shapeshifter. A godmaker, Vilgax corrected. I know how the device works, I know its flaws, and I know how to take it from him. Together, we can do more than just integrate this world. We can rewrite the hierarchy of the stars. Thrag remained silent for a long moment, the air in the throne room growing colder. Then he looked at his warriors. Leave us. The Viltrumites vanished in a blur of motion. Thrag landed on the floor, walking toward Vilgax until they were mere inches apart. You speak of a partnership, Thrag said. Viltrum does not have partners, we have subjects. Then consider me a consultant, Vilgax said, a dark smile playing behind his mask. One who knows exactly where the boy is being hidden by the local authorities. Thrag looked out of the massive viewport at the blue marble of Earth hanging below them. Very well, Chimran. You will lead us to the device. But understand this. If you fail to deliver what you promise, I will not just kill you. I will dismantle your species stone by stone until the name Vilgax is forgotten by history. Vilgax bowed his head, a gesture of mock subservience. Then let us begin. The boy is in a facility they call the Pentagon, and he is far more vulnerable than he realizes. The sublevels of the Pentagon didn't feel like a government building. They felt like a city built of cold, fluorescent lights and reinforced titanium. Ben walked down the corridor, his sneakers squeaking against the polished floor, flanked by Mark and a squad of GDA soldiers who looked like they were expecting him to explode at any second. I've seen some high-tech labs, but this is a bit much, Ben said, glancing at the biometric scanners and sentry turrets that tracked his every move. Don't you guys have a break room with a vending machine or something? The soldiers didn't answer. Mark, who was flying just a few inches off the ground to keep his weight off his bruised legs, sighed. You get used to it. Or you don't. Mostly you just try not to think about how many nuclear-level secrets are behind every door. They turned a corner into a massive glass-walled observation theater. Inside, a group of people in colorful costumes were gathered around a holographic table. Ben recognized a few from the news feeds he'd seen in the brief moments his watch was functioning, the guardians of the globe. Cecil was already there, standing at the head of the table. Guardians, meet Ben Tennyson, he said without looking up from the data. He's our guest from another zip code in the multiverse. A man in a sleek robotic suit stepped forward, his eyes glowing with a soft red light. I am Robot, he said, his voice a perfect, emotionless, synthesized tone. I have been reviewing the telemetry from the Baltimore encounter. Your device's ability to manipulate local reality and biological structures is unprecedented. A girl with orange hair and a pink suit leaned against the wall, her arms crossed. I just want to know if he's going to bring more of those cape-wearing psychopaths down on us, she said. One Omniman was enough for a lifetime. That's Monster Girl, Mark whispered to Ben. And the guy in the orange suit looking annoyed is Rex Splode. Rex snorted, sparks dancing between his fingertips. Great. Another teenager with a magic watch, just what we needed to save the world. It's not magic, Ben shot back, holding up his wrist. The Omnitrix was back to a steady green, the dial humming with a low, healthy pulse. It's the most advanced piece of technology in my universe. And for the record, I didn't bring the Viltrumites here. They were already coming. Vilgax just gave them a reason to hurry. Cecil tapped a button on the table, and a grainy satellite image appeared. It showed the Viltrumite flagship, a jagged white spear hanging in the darkness of space. It's not just the scouts anymore, Cecil said. Our deep space sensors just picked up a massive surge in the fleet's movement. They're consolidating, and we've lost track of the big green guy. He's on that ship, Ben said firmly. I know Vilgax. He doesn't run unless he's running toward a bigger weapon. He's going to try and cut a deal with those Viltrumites. Robot tilted his head. To what end? They seem interested only in absolute subjugation. Vilgax knows how to speak their language, Ben explained. He'll promise them the Omnitrix. He'll tell them he can give them an army that can turn into anything. If they get their hands on this, the Viltrumites won't just be strong. They'll be unstoppable. The room went quiet. The weight of the statement hung in the air, heavier than the miles of earth and concrete above them. Then what's the plan? Mark asked, looking at Cecil. We can't just sit here and wait for them to knock. We don't wait, Cecil said, his eyes turning to Ben Robot, and the GDA tech teams need to sync your watch's signature to our planetary defense grid. We need to know the second those ships break atmosphere. Ben looked at the Guardians, then at Mark. He could feel the pressure building again. It was the same feeling he got before a world-ending event back home, but this time, he didn't have his grandfather or Gwen to back him up. He had a group of strangers and a kid who looked like he'd been through a war. Fine, Ben said, but if we're doing this, we do it my way. I'm not a lab rat. If they come down, I'm the first one out there. Cecil gave a grim half-smile. Believe me, kid. Given what's coming, you're exactly where you want to be. The alarm system didn't beep. It shrieked. A red light flooded the room, and the holographic table flickered violently. Cecil, Robot's voice cut through the noise. The flagship. It's not breaking atmosphere. Then what is it doing? Cecil barked. It's firing, Robot replied, but not at us. The hologram shifted to show the moon. A beam of concentrated white energy struck the lunar surface, and for a terrifying second, the entire celestial body seemed to shudder. They aren't attacking the Earth, Mark whispered, his face going pale. They're clearing the way. A second later, the sky over the Pentagon didn't just darken. It tore open. A massive, triangular shadow began to descend directly over Washington, D.C., and the communication channels filled with a single, distorted voice that Ben knew by heart. People of Earth, Vilgax's voice boomed from every speaker and screen in the facility. Your reign of mediocrity has ended. Hand over the shapeshifter, or watch your capital become a tomb.